welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Happy Hour. Mike, what's going on?
Derek, we are back at Addys in their wonderful tasting room. So far, we're starting with waters, but shout out to Addys, and thank you so much for your continued hospitality. We appreciate it. But we have a wonderful individual. So let's start with titles, if those exist, and then just kind of dive into all things Clyde May's.
Awesome, yeah. So my name is L.C. May. I am the national brand ambassador for Clyde May's whiskey. So basically, I travel around the country and, talk all things Clyde May's whiskey. And I'm also the grandson of the original maker, Clyde May. LC actually stands for Lewis Clyde May. He was Lewis Clyde May. I'm Lewis Clyde May II. I've just always gone by my initials I don't really know why my parents started doing that. But, so been in this role now for going on 6 years, legally speaking, in terms of promoting the brand. But this is a brand that got its start in Southeast Alabama and has really come full circle from its early roots with Clyde May. And I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for having me on the show.
It's funny you say illegally because we'll get into the illegal stuff in a little bit.
Yeah.
But you said it's Lewis Clyde May?
Correct, yes.
Do you know why you guys started with Clyde May as the actual brand and not Lewis May or something?
Well, he always went by Clyde.
Oh,
He was
okay.
never known as Lewis, and everybody called him Clyde. So that was, he always went by his middle name. And really, when I was born, my parents couldn't decide if they were going to call me Lewis or Clyde. And I think some people got tired of, switching back and forth, and someone started calling me LC, and that's what stuck. But I'm Clyde May II.
That's cool. So Tyler here at Addys got us hooked onto your brand. He said, just try it out. It's a straight bourbon whiskey. That's the one that we had. And part of our show is doing the research on the company that we're reviewing to taste because we want to tell the story of it. And when we were researching, man, that was the coolest story I think we've ever read. So can you kind of step all the way back and from the start how Clyde May bourbon happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how much time you got, but here we go. So my grandfather was born in a very rural area in Southeast Alabama, and I can speak to that because I grew up 2 houses down from where he lived. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere just like he did. But he was born to a single mother, never knew his father, and his mother died when he was 5 years old. And he was raised by his grandparents, who were already fairly poor to begin with. And right around the time they brought him in, the Great Depression hit. So he had a very difficult childhood, to say the very least. And he was determined to do whatever it took to not have his children or his family go through the same hardships he went through as a child. So, but before he started growing his family, he did marry my grandmother, but shortly thereafter was sent overseas and fought in World War II. He's a Purple Heart recipient, Bronze Star recipient. If you're familiar with the movie Hacksaw Ridge, which is based on the life of Desmond Doss, he and Desmond Doss were in the same infantry together, the Statue of Liberty Division. So
sweet.
He's with a lot of movies, you talk about exaggeration, but I think the one category that's not said about is war movies. If anything, it's under-exaggerated with the battle and the bloodshed and everything that occurs. But he returned home from the war, recovered from his injuries, started raising a family. By the time it was all said and done, he had 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters. And he, in 1946, in addition to, and I want to be clear about that, in addition to having a full-time job, at that point in time he was logging. He was in the timber industry. But in 1946, he began making moonshine whiskey. And Clyde May, my grandfather, never sold a legal bottle in his entire life. From 1946 until he died in 1990, never sold a legal bottle. In fact, all 4 of his sons, including my own father, have also been arrested at least one time for making whiskey illegally. So, I do this now hoping to break that family tradition, but we'll see how my time in upstate New York goes. But my grandfather did get caught one time in the early 1970s, and he was a pretty prolific moonshiner. It wasn't that they didn't know he was making it, but for the most part, federal agents or local sheriff's departments, whatever, they had a mutual respect for moonshiners. They understood that they were just providing for their families, not harming anybody. I know that moonshining to a certain degree has come under a negative light at times throughout history because, it's poisoned people. That was never the case, not only for Clyde May, but any moonshiner in that area. They had a standard to upkeep. But I guess they had enough, and in the early 1970s, they arrested him, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He served 8 months of that 2-year sentence, got out for good behavior, thankfully. And then, like I said, he kept making moonshine whiskey until he died. But he wasn't your typical moonshiner, and I think that's probably evidence with what we do today.
Sure.
For starters, he took the time to age a lot of his moonshine into whiskey, which is where we get our original Alabama style recipe that we'll talk about in a moment. But obviously, when you're aging moonshine and doing something illegally, you're sitting on 53 gallons of evidence. Right. So that's something other moonshiners were not doing. A lot of moonshine is often associated with corn whiskey. People think corn. And while my grandfather did use corn, he also used a good bit of rye in his mash bill. He felt it was a flavor grain, which is something you'll hear a lot of master distillers say today. Mm-hmm. And it's the May family will tell you that Clyde May was calling rye a flavor grain back in the 50s. So, I guess he was a little bit ahead of his time. He just had to be, keep quiet about it. But and then in addition to that, he designed his own type of moonshine still. So if you were to go to Google right now and search moonshine still, probably 90 or 95% of what you'll see are pot stills. Mm-hmm. That is what is associated with moonshine whiskey. But my grandfather designed his own type of still that he felt made whiskey at a higher quality and more efficiently, and cooked the whiskey more evenly, especially in the not that you couldn't do that with a pot still, but it's easier to do that with a pot still when you're not having to look for the law over your shoulder. So he was constantly innovating. And when he died in 1990, about 11 years after he died, one of his sons, my uncle, Kenny May, started the brand legally. And so that's why we like to say available since 1946, legal since 2001. Mm-hmm. And we've had some kind of a roller coaster of a ride. We've had our ups and we've had a lot of our downs, but we've overcome that, and we're happy to be where we are today. And I'm happy to report too, which, it's been in the, it's not breaking news or anything, but we're building a distillery in Troy, Alabama, which is about 15 minutes from where Clyde was originally making his whiskey. And that'll be, hopefully, phase 1 will be open in July of 2023. That's what we're aiming for. So needless to say, we've come a long way since the humble beginnings of a moonshiner. Absolutely.
Do people in that area recognize the brand as someone that provided them whiskey back before it was legal?
Oh, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times, especially now, people would probably say it either way, even if this brand didn't exist legally. But especially with the legal brand, you get people all the time that's like, my grandfather used to buy from your grandfather, and I still have some of your granddad's stuff stashed away, and stuff like that. He was pretty prolific because a lot of people get bootleggers and moonshiners confused. Mm-hmm. Moonshiners make it, bootleggers haul it and sell it.
Right.
Now, Clyde May did a little bit of both. If you're making moonshine, you're doing some bootlegging to a certain degree, maybe some more than others. But he actually was as successful as he was because he met a bootlegger who had the right connections and started selling his stuff all over the Southeast. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe they didn't know, hey, this is Clyde's moonshine, but they knew if they wanted the best, they would go to that certain bootlegger and get it. And in my grandfather's heyday, during some of his busier times a year, he was making upwards of 300 gallons a week.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, he was, needless to say, that wasn't sitting on a shelf anywhere. When you're making moonshine, when you make it, it's got to be sold and out the door quickly.
Well, you said that he aged it. Do you know how long he used to age it for?
Yeah, so he didn't have the luxury of aging for as long as we do today. Sure. He was lucky if he could age between 11 months to maybe 14 months, so roughly a year.
That's still longer than I would have guessed.
Yeah, what he would do early on, and it's a fun story that a lot of people like to hear, because he was in the timber industry for a good number of years. He had to figure out ways to hide the barrel. That way, even if someone just stumbled in his barn or whatever, they wouldn't see this aging barrel. Mm-hmm. So he did things like he would put piles of sawdust on top of the barrels and they would keep it hidden from people walking in and seeing this barrel. And he was even known, he didn't do this too often, he was even known to bury barrels and just keep them hid that way, because, I mean, you got to do what you got to do. Fortunately, we don't have to do anything like that today, but, cheers to him for, the dedication to do it.
That's awesome.
And your grandma just supported him the entire time.
Hey, look, she took care of the kids and did her part. It's a lot of times they would have these glass gallon jugs that would have wine or something in it that they would buy to use for the moonshine. So they'd pour it out, and it was her job to clean out the gallons to make sure there wasn't any leftover residue from any kind of liquid that was in there previously. But no, she was, I think in that time, in that era, that wasn't a thing that was like, if your husband started making moonshine, it was like, well, hey, somebody's got to put food on the table, right? Now in today's time, if you go to your wife or whatever and say, hey, I'm making moonshine, she's like, all right, well, I'm leaving you. Well, that wasn't the case.
Right.
And fortunately wasn't the case for my mother either when my dad was making it, because when I say I've been around whiskey making both legally and illegally my entire life, I can truly say it, because even when this brand was legalized, it was very small for a long time. Not that the family didn't support it and root for it, but to be honest, we just didn't know if there was a capability of something like this to grow nationally. And my father took over from my grandfather when my grandfather died. So my father felt like he had a duty to Clyde May to continue making moonshine. So he actually didn't stop until 2013. So if that's any indication of being around it my whole life, yeah.
So what do we have here that's available at Addys?
Yeah, so for starters, we have the original recipe, what we call Alabama-style whiskey, and I'll explain what that is in a moment once I finish kind of the lineup here. But we also have a 92-proof straight bourbon whiskey, a 94-proof straight rye whiskey, and then a 110-proof small batch special reserve is what we like to call it, straight bourbon whiskey. And, of course, they're all unique for different reasons, some rye, bourbon, whatever. But what got the brand started was this Alabama-style whiskey, like I said. So this actually comes from the aged whiskey recipe of my grandfather. As I mentioned before, he didn't have the luxury of aging it for, 4 or 5 years like we do today. And he also was not aging in orphan barrels. That's kind of a common misconception. People just assume, like, well, he had to be aging in orphan barrels to hide it. No, he knew a gentleman who was able to get him 153-gallon barrel at a time. It's not like he had a rick house or anything, but he had one barrel at a time. But because he was not able to age it for as long as he would have liked, the finished product was not that desirable. It did not have the finish or the smoothness that he was out to get. And in addition to that, because it didn't have a full amount of time to react with the barrel, it didn't come out the appealing charred brown color. It was more of a yellowish color. True. And that was unappealing as well. So he started seeking out ways, hey, what can I do to make this whiskey a little softer, eliminate some of this bite and burn, and then B, what can I do to make it more appealing looking, because no one's going to even want to try it if it doesn't look correct. So he experimented with different finishes, and it's worth noting when he started aging whiskey, he only did it to give to his best moonshine customers as a Christmas gift for free, just like, hey, thanks for all your support. And when he did it the first time, he didn't like it, so he poured it out. He didn't sell it to anybody. Because he was a firm believer that his reputation was attached to every batch of whiskey he sold. So if it didn't meet his standard, forget about it. It wasn't getting sold. So it wasn't until the third or fourth round that with these different finishes he was trying that he found something that was like, yeah, I like this. I think this is the winning ticket here. And it was at the very end of the aging process, not the entire time, but at the very end, he would add just a handful of oven-dried apple slices to the barrel, not for flavor, but for finish. A lot of people instantly think apple flavor, apple. He was a firm believer that you can make bad whiskey and disguise that bad whiskey by over-flavoring it. Sure. So he wanted the quality of the whiskey to stand out, but at the same time, because he was doing something illegally, he did need a little help on the back end to help soften it up. And he felt that oven-dried apple slices at the very end of the aging process did that. But it also, the fact that they were oven-dry, they were literally like these those brown apple chips. I've seen my dad do it 100 times. And it would help with the color. It would help darken the whiskey and make it more appealing. Now, we don't have that issue today because we're doing it legally.
Sure.
So the Alabama-style whiskey, it's 85 proof. It's actually straight bourbon. It's 4 and 5 year old straight bourbon. But at the very end of the aging process, it's been dumped out of the barrels. At this point in time, it's still legally a bourbon. We add 0.003% natural apple extract to the blend, not for flavor, but for finish. In fact, most people who know nothing about Clyde May's whiskey and they drink this product and know nothing about Alabama style have no idea it's finished with a hint of apple. Now, when you tell somebody that beforehand, a lot of times, you're putting it in their mind and they're like, oh, yeah, I get lots of apple here. And it's like, yeah, do you really though? Yeah. And, just kind of like if you got two guys sitting next to each other, one noses a bourbon, oh, I'm getting notes of vanilla. And then the other guy noses, oh, I am too.
Yeah,
you're putting it in their head. But what we came up with, once we did it, because legally, once you do that, it's not a bourbon anymore.
Right.
So we started calling it Alabama-style whiskey. And the reason we did that, for starters, we wanted to kind of create our own name, kind of like how Jack Daniels wants to be Tennessee whiskey. We want to be Alabama-style whiskey. But in addition to that, legally speaking, we could say on the bottle, straight bourbon finished with a hint of apple. We just have to clarify how it was finished or what we did to it. But we don't want to bring too much attention to that word apple because it's truly not, 0.003%. I mean, come on. So now I will explain as well that Alabama-style whiskey is not like Kentucky bourbon or Tennessee whiskey where there's state guidelines or laws that kind of tell you what you have to do to qualify to be that product. Alabama-style is unique to us. It's my grandfather's recipe. We actually have that term trademarked.
That's cool.
That's not to say that people can't make Alabama whiskey or they can't add a hint of apple. They can do all that. They just can't call it Alabama-style. So that's unique to us. So any bottle you see that says Alabama-style whiskey, it just means just that little touch of apple, that little kiss of apple. But if it doesn't say Alabama-style, and this is something that has been confusing for some people, they think everything we make is Alabama-style, that everything we have has that hint of apple. That's not the truth. In fact, just this yellow label is the Alabama-style, and then the other three on the table are either a bourbon or a rye whiskey. So,
when your grandfather came back from the war, did he ever have thoughts of joining another distillery and distilling for them?
So, great question, because in the area we grew up in, literally I grew up on they called it Rabbit Road. The official is County Road 12. Out in the middle, and they call it Rabbit Road because in the 60s when they were looking at all these dirt roads to start paving, someone on that road said, will you pave County Road 12? And they said, no, there's nothing on it but damn rabbits. So then they started calling it Rabbit Road. So when Clyde May was making whiskey, it never, ever crossed his mind to do it legally. He didn't think that was possible. It never crossed his mind to say, well, hey, let me go to the state and see if I can get a license. And then at the time, too, there were no distilleries in Alabama. The first legal bottle of whiskey was distilled in Alabama in 2015.
Really?
So, yes. So Alabama technically didn't outlaw distillation, but every time somebody tried to get a license, they told them no. So basically, in a way, it was kind of illegal. I mean, it wasn't illegal, but if you're not giving anybody the opportunity to do it, it's kind of illegal. And they granted the first license in 2014, which kind of is why we have such a unique and interesting history, because when Kenny May, my uncle, started the whole process of trying to start this brand up, he actually started in 1999, and he went to the state of Alabama to try to get a license, and they told him no, which they were telling everybody no, but it didn't help that his last name was May. For him, it was kind of like a hell no. So he kept trying, and eventually he got tired of it and was like, I'm wanting to start something special here. I'm wanting to tell my dad's story. So he began sourcing, and he was, working with the distillery to finish with that hint of apple. But he was sourcing before people even knew what sourcing was. Back in 2001, if you went to your local liquor store, the bourbon shelf was probably a 16th of the size it is today in most stores. I mean, it was you had your basics, the ones everybody had known for 20 years. There was not a lot of new bourbon brands coming out at that time. So back then we could look at somebody in the eye and say, hey, this whiskey sourced, and they didn't even know what that meant. They were like, okay, whatever. I don't know what that means. But now it's much more, obviously, with the popularity of the internet and people and the growth of bourbon, people research, people know. I mean, it's at the point now to where when you tell somebody a mash bill, they know where it came from. I mean, it's come leaps and bounds. So despite that, in 2004, the state of Alabama made Clyde May's Alabama-style whiskey the official state spirit of Alabama, and we couldn't even legally make it there.
Seriously? That's sweet.
We got to drink it.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a really cool fun fact.
Yeah, it's Alabama was the only state in the country from 2004 until like 2018 or 19 with an official state spirit. Prior to that, most states don't even have an official state beverage, and the ones that do, it's like milk or apple cider or some kind of locally made soda.
Sure. No
alcoholic beverages have ever been an official beverage. So then we were the official state spirit, but we couldn't even make it there. So and the governor at the time, his name was Bob Riley, he actually vetoed the measure. He was like, what are we doing? What? So he vetoed and was like, we got bigger fish to fry. Why are we worried about doing this? Well, they actually overrode his veto and kept it the official state spirit. And I don't know the exact number of times, but it's only been 2 or 3 times in the state's history that a governor's veto has ever been overridden, and it was to keep this the official state spirit of Alabama. And the reason the people who, the legislators who pushed it and wrote up the measure, when you asked them about it, they felt it wasn't so much about the official state spirit talking about the whiskey. They were talking about the spirit of Clyde May, because they felt he embodied Alabama. He worked so hard his entire life, blue collar, sun up to sundown. He had to go outside the law a little bit to provide for his family, but no matter what, his family never needed or wanted anything. He had them covered. And World War II veteran, so they just felt he embodied Alabama. So they said, hey, official state spirit right here. So that's, why we have such a complicated and weird history. I'll go ahead and tell you our current juice in the bottle that you see in front of you is MGP juice. That's no secret. I'm very open when I discuss that because, like I said, we had no legal choice for a majority of our legal existence, at least. But because of that, we have a unique relationship with MGP, though. We are using them before most. So, for example, our 92 proof straight bourbon is actually a proprietary blend that they only produce for us. They don't produce it for any other brand they source for, and they don't produce it for any brand that they own. So, that we have a unique relationship with that. And well, now obviously, we probably couldn't go back and do that again, but we're excited now that it's legal to be bringing everything back home to Alabama. Is it the way we wanted it? Probably not, but the way I look at it is everything happens for a reason.
Sure.
We've come full circle. If Kenny May, who has since passed, but if Kenny May would have been able to build that distillery in 1999, it could have fit in this room right here. It would have been super small, very, very craft. I don't know if there's a word below craft whiskey, but that would have been it. And now we're building a $20 million distillery on 76 acres of land that's going to be just like something you see on the Bourbon Trail. So obviously, it all happened for a reason, I guess, and we've come a long way.
So the plan, obviously, you're using MGP now, but it's going to be your own mash bill. You're going to make it all there, and it's going to be true Alabama whiskey.
Absolutely. Eventually, right away, we'll begin bottling there. Even though it'll be MGP juice, it'll say bottled in Troy, Alabama. Not long after that, we're going to take some of those barrels that we had recently laid down and let them finish aging in Alabama. So we'll say aged and bottled in Alabama, and then after that it'll be distilled, aged, and bottled in Alabama. Now, I will warn listeners that we're in no hurry to just, you're not going to see a 12-month-old Clyde May's Alabama whiskey or anything. We are dedicated, if nothing else. While we do have an Alabama-style whiskey, and we do everything we do touches on my grandfather to some degree or in some way. The greatest tribute we pay to him is holding ourselves to that same standard of excellence. If it doesn't meet that standard of excellence, we're not going to sell it. That's why I stand by everything we produce, regardless of where it came from, what the age is, what the proof is, what the fermentation temperature length is, the yeast strain, the mash bill. And despite all that, we have to uphold a standard of excellence. And as long as we do that, then it'll have Clyde May's name on it.
That's awesome, because you have that ability to do like an 18-month and add the oven.
Correct.
Chips.
Yeah. We can, now I will say we are going to experiment with some stuff.
For sure.
We might blend some MGP with maybe some younger stuff, which, when you do that, though, you're having to quote the youngest barrel in the blend.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Even that's a little, now, like I said, though, regardless of age. So if we taste something and feel that it, is a good product, then yeah, sure. But time will tell on that. A little too early to, make any promises in that regard. Absolutely. But no, we're going to do what we got to do, and we're going to be able to experiment and do other things that Clyde May was doing that nobody else was doing or currently is doing. Mm-hmm. And we're excited about that.
Now, with the layout of the new distillery, is there room for, because 76 acres sounds like a lot, but when it comes to a building like this, it goes quick.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Do you have plans for like a farm section or area, or for your own grains, or are you just going to use local farmers?
No, we are going to use local farmers. Now, where we're building the distillery is actually on an old horse farm, so the land has primarily been used for baling hay and stuff like that for horses. However, the distillery, it'll be a distillery. We're going to have a rick house on site that can hold 10,000 barrels, but we have plans to build another one, not on site, but down the road, basically. A bottling facility, a museum, gift shop, tasting room, restaurant, bar. We have it's almost like once the floodgates open in Alabama, they really open. We got a unique license where people can actually go and order a drink, and then they can walk around the property and go see other things on the property and things like that. So it's going to be really unique in that regard. But to your point, that gets swallowed up quickly. Mm-hmm. So really everything we have planned for right now, there's really, I don't want to say there's not room for anything else, but nothing major.
Sure.
In fact, a lot of what we're doing, we're trying to plan for the future. So we're starting with a 24-inch column still made by Vendome, but behind it, we're leaving enough room if we need to later add a 36-inch column still. Wow. So, we're planning for the future. We've already acquired and looked into land about other rick houses, even though right now we're not planning on doing that right now, but we're looking ahead, because you have to do that in bourbon, of course. I mean, it's one of the trickiest things, and not just of all spirits, but just really anything. I mean, you're having to try to plan, all right, how many cases am I going to be selling in 5 years? And it's a really tricky area.
And you guys don't make a vodka or a gin or anything?
We do not make a vodka, nothing with the Clyde May's name except whiskey. Love and it. Now, of course, a lot of new distilleries, they do that, and I commend them for doing that. They got to get their feet under them. But if anything, if we're not making Clyde May's, we may, give back, just like these other distilleries have given back to us over the years, and maybe we source for somebody, but it'll be a whiskey or bourbon. It won't be a vodka or gin or nothing like that.
Can we try the Alabama style?
Yeah, I know. I've been running my mouth here for so long.
No, this is awesome. I'm just so fascinated by this story, especially the whole aspect of him choosing to add that rye in there, because I have never heard of that before from a moonshine.
I actually I got a fun story about that when we get to the rye whiskey. I think you'll like. So
what was that? What, is your wrist broken?
No, I was going to. There was a little bit of water in there, but I was going to dump it out. But
oh, you're fine.
As I say, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Oh yeah.
But as my I have my direct superior with this company. I live in Alabama's still a control state, so we still have our struggles being in a control state, but my direct superior, instead of saying it's 5 o'clock somewhere, he says it can be whatever time you want it to be right here.
That's right. Plus in Buffalo, bars close at 4 a.m. Yeah. So we drink constantly.
Cheers.
Well, cheers.
Hey, cheers.
Nice to meet you officially.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Your whole team's awesome. This is exciting. How many... Damn, That's good.
Yeah.
So what's the size of like employees that you guys have?
In terms, if you count salespeople, office workers like accountants or marketing or anything, it's right at 30, give or take.
Okay.
So it's not but while that isn't large at all by any stretch of the imagination, it has come tenfold over the years when.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be illegal.
Yeah, exactly. So I always wanted to, my goal or dream when I was a little boy is I wanted to be a moonshiner when I grew up, right? So, I wanted to be just like my dad and just like my grandfather, and I wanted to make whiskey. And my mom, who was a school teacher, used to hate to hear that. She'd be like, God,
here we go again.
I say as redneck as it sounds, I wanted to be a moonshiner. In fact, when my dad got arrested the first time, I was 10 years old. And the first thing she did, he was like, hey, you got to come bail me out of jail, right? He, was calling from the Dale County Jail in Alabama. And the first thing she did, she had tears running down her cheeks, understandably so. Who could blame her? And she turned around and looked at me, and she goes, you still want to be a moonshiner now? And I was like, yeah, I do. Hey, look, getting arrested comes with the territory, baby. Right. You got to do what you got to do. So when I got involved with the company, I never knew, and really this is just on myself. It was nothing the company ever did or said to me, but I wasn't sure if I had a role with the company. I didn't know if they envisioned me working in any kind of capacity, and they were like, you're joking, right? You're Clyde May II. Give me a break. But when I met with our CEO and stuff for the first time, right after I turned 21, we sat down at a table, and at that time there were like 8 people at the table, and that was our entire company. And that was in February of 2016. So we're approaching the 7-year anniversary of that, and we've gone from 8 to going on 30 plus people. So, and that's not even counting what we'll employ at the distillery once it's open. So
that's incredible.
Yeah. So going back to the original juice that your grandfather made, do you know by chance how much rye he even put in there? And is this the same mash bill that he did too?
Yeah, and real quick, to that point, were you given like a binder of papers? We're like, here you go, son. This is these are the recipes.
You just watched him. My father just worked with him and made with him, and it was just all up here. It wasn't stuff you just watch so many times and you just learn how to do it. But to your point and your question about the rye content or the rye amount, because of the manner in which he was doing it, there was no way to measure it exactly. Like, he wasn't able to say, like, all right, this is 30% rye or whatever the case may be. So it was more of just an eye test. He knew exactly how much rye. And it also depended on your still size, because, sometimes he had to adjust and make smaller stills, which came off, fewer number of drums or barrels that you had to mash with. So there were different factors at play with that. But I would say that, it was probably around, 30 or so % rye whiskey based on what I've witnessed with my own eyes as well. But like I said, when you're doing moonshining, just like they never knew the proof scientifically. Now, it is scary how good they got at it. So they will take a bottle, and I've seen my dad do it. It's really should be on like America's Got Talent or something. It's unreal. They will take a bottle and they'll shake it, and they'll look at the bubbles, but they call it the beads. They say, I'm studying the beads. And they look at it, and then they'll do it 2 or 3 more times, and they'll say, oh, that's between 95 and 100 proof. And then you'll look at the label. Like, I've done this with my dad, where I'll go buy some vodka or something that's got a weird proof, nothing that you can just luckily guess, and it'll be like 97.8 proof or something. He'll shake it, and he'll be like, between 96, 97 to maybe up to 100 proof. And I'm like, how are you doing that? And I'm gonna say, you're just looking at it, and it's something to do with like the amount of alcohol determines how big those bubbles are and how quickly before they pop and stuff like that. But and Clyde May could do it too, but it's scary how they can do that for sure.
That's crazy.
But you had a question too about, so in terms of the mash bill, you're limited in what you're able to do when you're sourcing. I think that's no secret. So the main thing we focus on is the fact that it's finished with a hint of apple. However, the rye content of this is a 75 corn, 21 rye, 4% malted barley, which is a common MGP mash bill. that rye content is very similar to what would have, or close to the amount that would have been in a Clyde May's aged whiskey, or even just his unaged moonshine.
When you were going through that process and narrowing down specifically with MGP what bill you wanted, were you tasting with family members when you're like, this is pretty close to how it was?
Actually, I've tasted a lot of these blends, stuff like that, but we have a great team. We kind of described a flavor profile. It wasn't so much about the mash bill. It was like, here's the flavor profile of what we're looking for. And we worked with MGP and then our corporate office, including our own CEO. He plays a very large role when he tastes blends as well. And when we get to a certain flavor profile, then that's when it's like, all right, this is what we want, this is what we like. But, in terms of most of the May family involvement with the brand is now kind of more behind the scenes support. I was the only one young enough to kind of grow into it. Because my dad was the youngest of 8 children, and his oldest sibling was 21 years older than him. So I'm bar none the youngest grandchild. So I was the only one that was able to kind of jump in and get my hands dirty, which, is cool too. So.
Do you have any siblings?
I have an older sister, yes.
Is she involved?
She is a nurse practitioner, so she steered clear of the whiskey business. So she's a...
she can help in other ways.
Well, I say she can. She was a valedictorian of her high school class, graduated top of her nursing class, and then meanwhile, our little brother's telling everybody he wants to, make whiskey for a living. Talk about make me look bad.
Right.
So, but it's cool because now I've come a long way, and I get on podcasts like this, and I was like, hey, Mallory, when was the last time you were on a nurse practitioner podcast? Are there many of those around? So
I didn't think so.
I'm about to say,
So
I told her, she was focused on school. I was focused on my life. You know what I mean? I just wanted to. You only get one chance in life. Got to live it. So,
for sure.
But no, she's very successful, and she's I'm very proud of her, and we give each other a hard time, but she supports me. Like I said, all the May family members, even if they're not directly involved with active whiskey making, they are our biggest champions of the brand, because more so than the whiskey, they want the story of Clyde May to carry on.
So was the Alabama style the first product that you launched with? Or was
Correct.
Okay. What was that like, trying to market it as not being bourbon?
It was... So Kenny May, my uncle, his experience with whiskey making was the exact same as Clyde May or my father. He had helped his dad make it illegally. So, now he was a heck of a salesman. He really was. But at the end of the day, too, he had no industry experience from a legal point of view, dealing with distributors, dealing with retailers, dealing with, on-premise, off-premise, all these things. So, yeah, there were struggles there. But, at the same time, though, he wasn't a national guy. I mean, he was just kind of selling to a subset of people in Alabama. And then as the brand kind of died down for a while, and then around 2012, 2013, it kind of picked steam back up, and we haven't looked back ever since. But
why do you think that was back then?
Various reasons. Actually, my uncle Kenny May, and this is kind of public knowledge, you can Google it, but my uncle Kenny May actually got in trouble while, he was making the whiskey legally. He got in more legal trouble himself with the way he handled certain things. So he more or less stepped aside from the business, and the May family stayed involved, but it was more on an investment level. None of them had been working the day-to-day like he did. So it wasn't until we kind of added on more people to the investment group that we were able, because you can have the best whiskey on planet Earth, but if you don't have the right people behind it, it's not going to go anywhere.
Sure.
And I think that's with any spirit or really anything in life, probably. Once we got the right people behind it, and I'm proud to say we have some of the best industry veterans. A couple of them are sitting behind me over here with me in the room, but they've really helped grow this brand. And along with our distributor partners and everything else, we've come certainly a long way. But our state manager in Alabama, I'm going to give him a shout out. His name is Chandler. He's been with the company for a while now, and he was kind of there in the early periods of kind of that revival of trying to get it back going and get the steam behind it. And he jokes that in his first year with the company, he drank more than he sold, So, but we've come a long way. But from 2001 until like 2004 14 or 13, the only product we had was the original Alabama style. We didn't really start expanding the portfolio until around 2012, 2013, and we, introduced a higher proof Alabama style whiskey, and then from there we introduced the 92 proof bourbon, and then the rye, and so on and so forth.
How many states are you in?
All 50.
My man.
It's a handful of countries, too. We've come a long, long, long way. I mean, we have distribution in all 50 states. I've traveled to almost 40 for work-related reasons, and I'd never been on an airplane until I was 21 years old and started with this company. I mean, that was my first whiskey show or whiskey anything, so I was still in college. I was a senior at the University of Alabama, and they called me, and they're like, hey, we want you to come work Whiskey Fest in New York at the Marriott Marquis. And they were like, you cool with that? Can you get out of a couple classes? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm telling these people it's what I'm going to be doing for a living, and the whole reason you go to college is to figure out what you're going to do for a living. So if my professor's got a problem with it, pound sand. But no, they were cool though. And I flew up to New York and never been on an airplane before, and I was very scared to tell them that. I was like, I don't want them to think I know they want my true Southern to be part of the charm, I guess, but I don't want them to think I'm straight up, full-blown redneck, right? So it was actually our CEO. We were leaving the Whiskey Fest, in which, it's like throwing somebody in the lines, Dan. You talking about a first whiskey show being Whiskey Fest. My God, that was brutal. But I think I handled myself well, and then we were leaving. He was walking me back to my hotel, and I was looking up at Times Square and all the lights and everything shining down, and I was just amazed by it. I never seen Times Square except, when you watch the ball drop on New Year's Eve or watch Law & Order SVU or something. That's the only time I'd ever seen Times Square. And he was like, and his name is Roy Danis, and Roy was like, LC, have you ever been to New York before? Is this your first time? And I don't know. I guess I told him the truth. I was just like, Roy, prior to today, I never been on an airplane. And he couldn't believe it. He was like, oh, my God, you've never been? And I was like, I grew up on Rabbit Road, man. Anywhere I needed to go, I drove.
Yeah, right.
So I had no need to fly anywhere. So, but now I think I'm a pretty frequent flyer at this point in time in my career.
Yeah.
So.
Did you study business in college?
So actually, when I went to college, I was while I wanted to get in this business, I kind of focused on what if this falls through, or what if they don't want me, or what if I suck, right? So I kind of focused on other areas that I was interested in. Primarily, I've always been interested in camera work and stuff like that. So I did what was called at the time, I think it's called like multimedia journalism now, but it was called telecommunication and film back when I was in school. And I worked with the Alabama Athletic Department, and I was a camera operator anytime ESPN, SEC Network, or not CBS, they were kind of the one holdout, but anytime any kind of athletic event was filmed, was shot at the school, I was a camera operator for that, and that was kind of my backup plan. So now I did minor in business and stuff like that because, I knew what I wanted to do. Sure. But when it comes to whiskey, you definitely got to know the business, but it's like our CEO says, he doesn't mind hiring people that have no experience in this industry. You just got to find the right people that know how to work and work hard for what they want to do, and hard work is nothing I've ever shied away from. In fact, it's all I was ever raised to know. I mean, Clyde May, he was built on hard work. He loved his children, he provided for his children, but he had a very tough philosophy. If they came home and said, Dad, I made a 100 on my math test, it's like, well, good, you were supposed to. You're supposed to give everything you got and everything you do. So that's the way I was raised. So I knew going into it that I could handle myself, but it was just a fact of matter of over the course of time learning the behind the scenes stuff, about distributors and things of that nature. And every state has different laws. Anytime I go into a new market, I have to learn about pouring samples at an event or doing this or that, because every state's a little different. And like I said, I'm trying to break the family tradition of getting arrested. So trying to move on from that, but we'll see,
How are sales in Hawaii?
Actually, I was just looking at our numbers, and we had one of our best months ever in Hawaii last month. So, we actually do really well in Alaska. I think we were talking a little bit about that before we started the podcast, but I've been to Alaska twice to sell whiskey. That's how good of a, and they're not going to send me up there unless they're doing a certain amount of volume, of course. And they're doing well enough to where I have visited Anchorage and Fairbanks and some surrounding areas. I've been as far north as Denali selling Clyde May's whiskey and bourbon. Yeah. So, and yet this is my first time in Buffalo today. So I just got off the plane and came straight here.
Cheers,
so,
man.
Yeah, cheers.
That's
awesome.
Do you like it?
Well, hey, so far so good. I mean, what I know about it is what I saw in the car ride from the airport to right here. But it's definitely. I've been talking about coming up. I mean, I've been in upstate New York, just not specifically Buffalo. But we've been planning this for a long time, and I've been really excited because even though I travel a lot, I literally just got back from Austin, Texas a couple of days ago and turned right back around and came up here. It can get exhausting at times, but at the same time, I'm trying to tell my grandfather's story. I think it's a story worth hearing. I think it's a story that needs to be told, and I'm a firm believer in that. So I just go out there and do what I got to do to tell the world about it.
For sure. So you went to the straight bourbon after a couple years after your Alabama style whiskey.
Right.
What is the difference between those two outside of the apple?
Yeah, so outside of the apple, of course, that's one of the bigger differences.
Right.
But they're both blends of 4 and 5 year old straight bourbon. So legally speaking, 4-year-old, you got to quote the youngest. But it's 92 proof, and it's also non-chill filtered. Which all of our products are non-chill filtered except the Alabama style whiskey because it's below 90 proof. But in addition to that, the 92 proof is a different mash bill. So I alluded to it earlier about how we have kind of a unique blend. It's 81% corn, 15.75% rye, and 3.25% malted barley. So that's obviously, if you say that to somebody, they have no idea where that's coming from. And it's MGP. It's just something they're doing unique for us. It's a unique blend.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And then after that, you brought in the rye.
Correct.
Is that 100% rye?
It's 95%.
95 rye.
Doesn't drink like it, though. Not at all.
And then after that, you have your special reserve. Was there some hesitation to migrate away from the traditional what your grandfather made when you started bringing in the rye and everything else?
Absolutely. We had been just Alabama style for so long, and it's something we certainly discussed. It wasn't just an easy decision to say, hey, we're going to release a bourbon and a rye. But then we decided, it wasn't so much about the growth. I would be lying to you if I said it didn't have a little to do with the growth of the category. But at the same time, we are getting a unique opportunity because we were kind of ahead of the curve to get access to some phenomenal juice, some phenomenal rye, some phenomenal bourbon. And what the Alabama style is bourbon, and we couldn't call it that because we're adding just that little touch of apple. So we were like, you know what? To honor Clyde May, he had to do, because, his mash bill was never 100% the same throughout his life. He never aged the exact same amount of time every time. He never used the same amount of apple every time. He was constantly expanding and experimenting. So in the spirit of that, we said, that's one of the better ways to honor him is if we got something that we feel can carry on his legacy by the quality of the product, let's do it.
Sure. That's awesome.
How did you roll into the special release or the special reserve?
So that's actually a newer release from us. I'm not going to say brand new. I think we're going on about a year and a half or so. It's a 6-year-old, so a small batch. And it's done very well. It's probably, in terms of a new release on our behalf, it's probably the greatest debut we've ever had in terms of how well it's done out of the gate. When we released that product, initially it came out and it won double gold at San Francisco World Wine and Spirits, which was cool. Well, then this year it won double gold again. So it was back-to-back double gold winner. Well, then this year they did a blind taste test of their bourbon submissions. They didn't know what it was or what the brands were, and that product finished in the top 3. So then when that happened, you start getting websites, magazines, stuff like that are basically, they look at these award shows and try to find brands that are, I don't want to say easy to find, but they're not your Wellers or stuff like that. They're brands that maybe people have never heard of that are racking up all these awards, and it's like, why not talk about these brands? And so articles like top 9 bourbons you got to try right now, top 10 or top 5 bourbons, and we've been there. And a lot of brands, you look at brands like 1792 Foolproof or Henry McKenna or Wild Turkey Rare Breed, it was a good review or some kind of award that kind of blew up and helped them, do really, really well. I'm not saying we're in that air yet, but because of those awards and everything that's happened with it, it's been a great debut for us. It's a great product.
So has it been kind of, it hasn't really been a steady growth. It kind of has been like a little bit, then it's just kind of blown up over the past couple years.
If you look back at starting at 2001, it was almost like tsunami waves. It was like up, down, up, down, up. But now it's been just a slow, steady growth. We are one of the fastest growing whiskeys in the United States. I mean, I remember back in like 2017 when we looked at our Nielsen's for the first time ever, we were number 96. And we were chest bumping. We're in the top 100. You know how many bourbon brands are out there? Right. We're top 100. Heck yeah, baby. And like a year or two later, we had gone from 96 to 52 in just a very short amount of time. And at that point in time, it was no other brand had jumped more than 10 spots, and we jumped 40, so we've come a long way, and that's in large part due, to the quality of the product, but, when more and more people learn about Clyde May, and I think no matter where you're from or where you live or how you grew up, you can kind of take hold or take grasp of the life that Clyde May lived and how he was working hard. He was providing for his family. And in rural southeast Alabama, when you're an 8th grade dropout, there's not a whole lot of opportunities just to make $1 million without doing something like this. And he wasn't hurting anybody. He was just making a fine quality product. Now, while he did it for his family, it quickly became part of him. Like I said, he was dedicated. It didn't matter if he was making birdhouses or making whiskey. He was going to make them the best that he could, and I think that's why it's a little sad or depressing at times that he can't see the success of the brand today. But honestly, if he were still alive, he would probably still be making it illegally, and the brand wouldn't even be a legal brand. So, everything happens for a reason, like I said earlier.
That's awesome. So next big thing is obviously that distillery warehouse. The whole thing's going up next year. June, you said? Around that time frame?
We're hoping for June, July. It's, you never know with weather and other impacts. And, of course, with supply shortages of certain things, that can always be a factor. But that's what we're aiming for phase 1. That'll be the actual distillery, the rick house, the bottling facility, and kind of the, with all due respect, the touristy stuff,
Sure.
Like the museum and the gift shop. That's kind of phases 2 and 3, so...
That's awesome. And are you guys on social media where people can kind of track where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. At Clyde May's Whiskey on both Instagram and Facebook. You can go to our website, ClydeMays.com. If you're not local to the Buffalo area and know to come here to get these products, you can, no matter where you live, you can type in your zip code and it'll show you the closest. Not only the closest liquor store, but the closest bar or restaurant that serves or carries our product. And we're also available on a variety of online retailers as well. So a lot of opportunity to, go and read more and find out more about Clyde May. So.
Love that.
Thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you. This has been awesome. Appreciate everything.
Guys.
This has been so much fun.
I don't take it lightly. Anytime I get the opportunity to speak about Clyde May, no matter the platform, I don't care if I'm speaking to one person, just one-on-one, or a podcast, or 2,000 people. I've done it all, but given the opportunity to speak about Clyde May is something that I literally live for. So that's a debt I can never repay to either one of you, except with maybe whiskey. I don't know if I give you enough whiskey, maybe we'll call it even. But thank you guys for having me.
For sure.
And good luck on much continued success too.
Awesome.
Thank
you so
man.
much. Go follow them on Instagram. Go follow them everywhere. Look at where they are near you. You have to go pick some of this whiskey because it's unlike anything you've ever had, and it's just going to continue growing from here. So thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.
Cheers. Thanks.
Cheers, man.